Hello and welcome further inside Chor Leoni. My name is Erick Lichte. I'm the Artistic Director of that fine organization and ensemble. And joining me today is somebody that I've really wanted to have an in-depth conversation, someone I've really wanted to go further inside with. He is the Artistic Director of The Crossing, which I think, at least in my opinion, is one of the finest professional choirs in the world, and has an incredibly amazing mission and focus for their work. He also directs choirs at Northwestern University, and I'm very, very pleased to have on this show Donald Nally. Hello, Donald.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's really, really great to have you here. I am really curious because I don't think I know a ton of these answers already, so it's going to be a great exploration for me. Tell me a little bit about how you came to choral music. Like, what were those formative experiences? How did you work your way into this profession?
That's the last thing I thought you were going to ask me.
Turns out it was the first. So
yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Well, I sang as a kid, like a child, but I was a saxophone player, and I was very, very serious about that. Played viola and piano, and I started college as a saxophone major, but I changed immediately because I knew I wanted to be a choral conductor, and that really came about as a result of singing in choirs, in church choir, mostly as a kid. But then when I was a senior high, I didn't sing in choir in junior high and high school because I went to one of those schools that it was kind of a little complicated to do that.
Yeah.
And also do orchestra and band and jazz band. And so my last year I decided I really, really wanted to do that. And I joined the choir, and I loved it. And I had a great choral director, Larry Bautel, and he was a huge influence. And so
Where did you grow up? I don't know.
I grew up in Upper Bucks County in Pennsylvania. So I grew up about a little over an hour and 15 minutes or so from Philadelphia, but I grew up in farm country.
Beautiful there. Yeah.
It's really beautiful there. I mean, a lot of those farms are now like developed into, cul-de-sacs with ridiculously large homes on them, but not actually exactly where I grew up. So I changed my major in my first semester at university, and I immediately got a church job in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, and started conducting at 17, and I haven't stopped.
The Crossing, I think it's a unique project. It's not like any other one that I know of. And I'd like to know a little bit more about the formation of this group, and how did the ideas and the focus for what it does coalesce? Was that from the very beginning? Has that evolved over time? Tell us a little bit about how that group began and how it moved into where it is today.
So I have lived in Philadelphia for 11 years, and I had done a bunch of different jobs. I'm like a serial quitter, and there's a kind of weird logic to that trajectory, even though in the moment it's not very obvious, but looking back on it, you're going to see it. And so when I first went to Philadelphia, I had two positions. One was at Westchester University as the choral guy, and one was at the Opera Company of Philadelphia as the choral guy. And I knew after a few years that the university thing wasn't going to work for me at that point in my life, and I quit. And I started working at Scott Detra, and I built this program there that had this amazing choir, and we just chewed up literature, and a lot of contemporary literature. That congregation got used to hearing contemporary British composers in particular, and then I started conducting the Choral Art Society of Philadelphia, and and I tell you all of that because by the end of 11 years, I had this kind of posse of incredible singers that we did everything together, and we loved each other very much, and we relied on each other both, you know, musically and personally. And then I left. I decided that I wanted to find out, you know, what was outside of Kansas. And
Sure.
so I took a job at Welsh National Opera and moved to Cardiff. And it happened to be like coincidentally at a time when a lot of those people were also going, I think I'll go to get a master's degree. Maybe I'll go get married and have children or whatever. And people started kind of like,
Of your singers, you're talking.
yeah, right. They started to sort of disperse. And I don't think it was because I moved to Wales, but it just was, I don't know, we were just all in life transitions, you know. So I was back about a year and a half after I moved to Cardiff. And I was working almost entirely in opera, which turned out to not be the smartest thing for me, which is fine. But you know, it was very clear to me that like that thing that was in the distance from the very moment that I got there, which was this isn't really going to work, was getting closer and closer to me. You know, so. Although it wasn't there at all yet, but anyway, so I was back in Philadelphia. I was sitting having beers with some of those singers, and somebody joked, you know, somebody said I really miss making music together, and somebody else said, well, we should do it. And had this laugh about yeah, we should do a concert. And I went back to Wales, and Jeff, my co-founder, wrote to me and he said, so when? And I said, well, what does that mean, you know? And we said, you know, maybe we should just give ourselves a name. We're not going to like incorporate anything because this is not going to be a thing.
This will never turn into something, right?
Yeah. It's not going to be a thing. And we'll sell tickets and we'll split the box office, and if it pays for parking, great. And we wrote to 18, at the time it was 18 singers, and every one of them said yes, even if they had to pay their own play ticket, and came back and we put this concert on, and we got like everything that you could imagine public relations wise happened. So, you know, we got a preview in the paper, we got a review in the paper, we had a great crowd, and we realized that there was a following for our work that we had left.
From before, yeah.
Yeah, we just didn't really realize it at the time. Anyway, when we decided we were going to do this concert, I said, you know, I want to focus more and more on new music in my life, and so I'd like to do more of that. So the first concert wasn't entirely new music, but it was mostly, and the new music went so well that we went, okay, I think we can do this. We should do what we want to do because we don't really care if it's a success. We just want to get together and sing.
Right.
And here we are.
Wow.
It
sounds like that journey of mission and finding the clarity of that mission was a very organic one.
Well, yes, and you know it's funny because I had another group called the Bridge Ensemble in the 1990s, and it was a really good group, but it failed for all of those mistakes that you can make. You know, mostly trying to follow somebody's 1980s model of how a group works.
Right.
And so when I came back to this, I rejected all of it. I said there are no rules. Nobody's going to tell me how to do a board. We didn't have what we call an adult board for 10 years.
Wow.
I wanted to wait until I knew that the people that were going to come to work and support us and be a part of the community were going to totally be in the mission, and were never going to say to me, Donald, the programming, they're never going to say that to me.
Right.
So we had this community board that that advised us for a number of years, and it was great. And most of those people did come onto our board eventually. But that's just one example. And we have a very egalitarian group. We have the board has 3 voting singers and me. I'm a voting member on the board. The whole thing is structured in this very particular way. and it's not really the way like we were supposedly taught. And then, you know, Jeff and I were very interested in social issues, and so after we got ourselves a little bit established, we were able to move our commissions into social advocacy of environmental issues, wealth distribution, you know, all the things that I really want. And the great privilege of doing it now is that, you know, we kind of have a voice, or, you know, to a certain group of people who are at least like kind of looking up to see what it is we're up to. And we take that voice extremely seriously, and we try to use that voice to create pieces that really, really respond to the world that we're living in.
That is that's really extraordinary, and it flies in the face of. I think we're seeing so many professional groups sprouting up all over North America right now. And the how and even more importantly, the why those are sprouting up sounds like very different stories than what you're telling me here. And I think there's something about the body of work that you've done that's very reflected in that organic trusting your gut approach versus, you know, I'm going to put my stamp upon the world in that kind of way. If that does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, nobody needs my stamp. You know, you know, you know, honestly, Eric, it's really about like, and you know this because of the community that you conduct. It's very obvious when you watch, you know, your group sing that is a community that's responding to you as a human being and to each other as human beings. Well, we're very fortunate that we have, you know, I mean, we're in our 15th year. So, I mean, if you count those first 3 years where we were like, just going like, you know, we're in our 15th year, and so a lot of those people don't sing with us anymore. They've moved on to other things, and, you know, but the replacements have always had to pass the test of, is this someone that you'd want to spend a week at the ocean with?
That culture thing, yes.
Mm-hmm. You know, is this someone that you could call up and say, you know, there's something very seriously wrong in my life right now. I need to talk to someone. And that really is, and I don't, you know, I learned a long time ago, mostly through opera, frankly, don't let people in the room that you wouldn't want to do that with. And the whole structure of my life is like that. All the donors, all the board members, my students at Northwestern, it's all just made up of people that I'd happily get in a car and drive across the country with.
When people come to audition for Chor Leoni, let's say, they may have the voice, they may have all the sight reading skills and, you know, everything that you want to do, but most of what happens in that audition is sitting down and talking for 20 minutes and figuring out exactly what you're saying, because in many ways we're curators of that community, and that level of responsibility for us is, I think, I don't think people understand how important that aspect of the community part of choirs and organizations really is. It's so great to hear you speak about that. So
well, I mean, I just want to add, you know, like we talk about this with my grad students all the time, because, you know, I mean, there's only so much you can teach about conducting, frankly, you know, but you know, I try to teach about listening and breathing, but we're also teaching about community, and of course that I only have 4 students, 2 doctorates and 2 master's students, so that community is super fragile,
pretty tight.
And so I'm really careful about that. But anyway, what I was going to say is that, you know, I hear myself saying this a lot when I'm asked a question like this. And like, if you have a 24 voice choir and you only have 5 tenors and you need a 6th one and the 6th guy is an asshole, do it with 5 tenors.
Do it with 4.
Because they'll ruin the experience, you know.
Absolutely. And but it's so great. I just think that amateur choirs can live so much. The reason why they're there is clearly their heart, and sometimes the professional thing that can tip other ways. I've certainly seen, and that's just so refreshing to hear that this is such an important part of your professional music making.
We have this values kind of list of values, and it came about by accident. It came about because the executive director that joined us just 2 years ago now. We've only had an executive director for 2 years because I also have like a total allergy to overhead. So
right.
Overhead makes me sneeze uncontrollably. So Jonathan came in, and Jonathan's great, but he came from a background at Carnegie Hall, okay, which is a corporation, and so we kept finding ourselves like pressing pause, and me going like, no, let me explain to you why this has to be this way, or let me explain to you why that can't be that way, you know. And it was always about people. It was always about people. And so I finally sat down one day and I wrote out like why the marketing looks the way it is, why the way in which we write has one singular voice and what the voice is, why we interact with singers or composers or orchestra members or whatever in a certain way, what communication actually is. I wrote the whole thing out. And so we have this values statement basically now. And it's really interesting because it does reflect it reflects several decades of getting it wrong.
Of course. I want to change topics just a little bit because the work that you're doing in terms of your commissioning, the projects that you're creating in the choral world, that and a few of them on the face of it don't even seem like choral projects when you maybe explain them out. I want to know a little bit about what is it about a composer that's going to excite you to just engage with them? And I want to know a little bit more about how that engagement happens. But like, what are the things that are there some things that you're looking for? Maybe they're akin to those values that you're speaking of, that are really a part that spark your interest in a composer, because you're definitely not singing music that's one kind of thing all the way. You've commissioned people all over the board, so there has to be some sort of common thread, I would think, to what gets your juices flowing.
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's it's actually not that different than what it is about singers. It's like an individual creative voice with an like insatiable desire to express themselves and the inability to do that through speaking. And so they have found their way through an art that they at least are a little bit better at it than when they're talking. And they rely on that art for that reason. And also, largely also people who are extremely empathetic and want to talk about the world we live in, and admit to the ugliness of it and how much we do get it wrong.
Right.
And the things that we collectively agree to. I mean, I did this thing with Santa Fe last night, and the contemporary artists. Center for Arts there, and you know, and I found myself saying, you know, this crisis that we're in is ripping the Band-Aid off of all of the things that we have agreed to as a society, including the 15% that don't count at all and the 65% who are just barely making it by and now aren't going to be able to do that. And yet Stephen and I can order our groceries from Amazon.
That's right.
And I'm grateful that we can. I'm grateful for the life that we've been able to eke out. Neither of us came from anything. But man, you know, if you come out of this thing not thinking that your art needs to respond to that, I feel sorry for you. You know,
is that in terms of the picking of projects, timeliness can be maybe in my opinion a double-edged sword as far as like doing something that's of the moment versus something that's going to have you know, universality that could be sung and understood and be poignant 100 years later. Where do you fall in that continuum, and how do you manage being of the time when you're commissioning this music, which is happening right now, and or don't you think about that?
Well, I do a lot, because it goes back to the question of what do you look for in a composer, and one of those things is a healthy objectivity. You know, we tend to not commission composers who rely on a subjective view of their relationship to the world. And that's just because I don't hang out with people like that, you know, even though they're very, some of them are very lovely. I mean, I know some of them, and they're very wonderful people who care deeply about people, but, I don't know. I see the world, you know, equal levels of love and hate, and so that objectivity has to be, you know, present with a composer, whether they're responding to the time or just writing a piece of, you know, whatever, for clarinet and bassoon. The distance, you know, that you need in order for you in order for other people to relate to what it is that you're saying, but from their own distance, so that they can find themselves in the piece. And so that gets into, you know, the fact that I feel like my life has largely developed into being a journalist. And I don't mean that in any kind of self-congratulatory way. In fact, it removes me from certain aspects of the art that back in the day, you know, it was like, I can't wait to get myself on this piece of music so I can say something, you know? And I don't believe that anymore. It happens if I'm honest and open and not pushing. So I'm, when we are talking about projects that have to do with the world that we live in, it is always from the standpoint of, you know, let's use words of people that know what they're talking about, or let's use words of people who don't know what they're talking about. You know, the video that I sent you of animals, you know, Ted and I didn't talk a lot about that. And he hasn't put anything up on his website about that piece besides it was commissioned by the Park Avenue Armory and us, because he doesn't really want to say anything beyond the fact that these are two sentences that the president said, these aren't people, these are animals. Now listen to the piece. You decide who the animals are.
Right. What's challenging for me, and but I think you always tread this line so your head and your heart become one in a lot of the commissions that I see you do, where this is, things don't become preachy or heavy-handed in the delivery of that message. Is there any advice you could give to people, or some guideposts that you could give to people who are going to want to sing about, social injustice, or what have you, but can find a way for the art to make it in?
What comes to mind, and I don't really, I'm not positive why this comes to mind, but what comes to mind is, the actor on the stage who is overtly crying is not something that we can relate to. It's the actor on the stage who is desperately trying not to cry.
Right.
That's what we know. And I think that's a good rule. Tears are not drawn by the emotive relationship of a choir to a piece of music. They're drawn by the honesty on the page and the commitment to trying to deliver that. And that may, in fact, evoke a tremendous emotional outpouring from the listener, but it's going to be because they found something in themselves that they had forgotten that they knew. I mean, music, a piece of music should change us.
Yeah.
You should be different at the end of it. And if it doesn't do that, somebody is doing something wrong. Either the composer or the conductor in choral music is doing something wrong.
I couldn't agree more. I want a couple more things before we end this little section here. When you're commissioning, what's your role? How does that relationship happen in the birthing process? Midwifery, right?
I'm laughing because if my husband was here, this is when he would get up. He would walk over to the bar and then out onto the deck. You're like, oh, here we go. Well, because I'm kind of hands-on about it. And it's because, I want our seasons to make sense as an entire story, not literally, but like if you went to every piece in the season and you get to the end of the season, I want you to be able to go like, I get it. And I want every concert to feel that way too, whether it's one concert length piece or whether it's, we very seldom do short pieces, but let's say we do. And it's 14 different pieces, then I want them to, like, at the end of that to be able, or maybe 3/4 of the way through it, go, oh, I've been on this journey. Okay. And so the reason I say that is because then these seasons, I can't just go, hey, I was talking to Tanya Leon the other day. I'm like, hey, Tanya Leon, just write a piece of music for us. No.
No work. It
has to be, this is what I'm thinking, this is what our season's going to look like 3 years from now. This is what, this is who I want to work with if it's not just us. This is what I think would make a great starting point for the topic, or maybe this is a good team member. Ted Turner and I have been working on this big, massive thing that we're going to do in a couple of years about farming and food sovereignty. And so, there's already this, there's a filmmaker and a director and a lighting designer and a sound person and, a project manager, and there's like 3 others, and we're already in on all the conversations about this piece that we don't even know what the text is yet. So I'm really hands-on about that, like I don't want Jesus in a piece of music for me. It's and the reason is partly because there's so many people out there who do. And I think that's great. They should do that.
Right.
The world doesn't need me doing it, and they certainly don't need me doing that as a non-believer. You know, it would be disingenuous. Now that story, that's a great story, and he was, you know, he had a lot to tell us, and there are things from that that could apply to everybody's lives, and I'd be happy and open to that. But the world has plenty of Ave Marias. They don't need any more from me. Did I answer your question? I can't remember.
Absolutely. And especially on the front side, I think so many composers come up to me and just say, I want to write a piece for you. And I say, okay, well, what do you want to write about? I don't know. And, you know, like, you know, it needs to be certainly a shared vision. But I'm also, yeah, go ahead.
I will say, though, there's at a point where we say, okay, we're close enough, that then I say, I'll talk to you in 18 months.
Right.
You know, we can. I'll check in with you and, you know, see whether this is still resonating with you and whether you're ready to start writing and all that kind of stuff.
Now, okay, so then you get that first draft of the score. What's that process from getting that first draft to the premiere? Like, I assume you're still quite hands-on here, yes?
You know, I'm not a composer. I mean, I've composed a lot of music and I've studied composition quite a bit, but you know, I'm not a person who naturally makes something out of nothing. I'm the idea guy, and somebody decided a long time ago that they would let me loose in front of singers, so I get to do that. So I'm not gonna pretend to be that. But if somebody sends me, you know, a score that has like a whole bunch of chords written on middle C and then the melodies down around low A and the bass, I'm going to be compelled to tell them that this
right.
score,
this is going to be a problem.
If you turn it upside down, you'll see that it actually works.
Like the Mozart, yeah. Well, and I ask you this because you know, I think you're one of the foremost commissioners of our time, and I work with so many choir directors that if they do a commission, they assume that a Bach manuscript just arrived to them, and every single note is part of this is just ironing out just these little details, and sometimes trying to suss out what the composer really had in mind. And we know our choirs, we know the acoustics, we know how this is going to work, and we can facilitate to actually make that vision stronger. But sometimes I think a lot of choir directors don't want to have that conversation. And for me, that's like the whole fun of commissioning, is like getting your hands dirty, going gardening together and watching something grow.
So I just want to say that, like, it's very true. And, you know, one of the fortunate things about my life, which also makes it very colorful and interesting, is that I deal with composers every single day of the year, every day. And so that taught me long ago that even the greatest of composers are just people who are, like, you know, have all the same problems I do. And it really informs me about historic composers. So one of the things that my students have to get used to when they come to work with me is, you know, me like sitting there saying like, yeah, that's not Bach's best moment. I mean, it's like, it's a great piece, but, you know, or, you know, that's like Beethoven was, you know, either he ran out of time or I don't know. And they're like, what? You can't talk about, like, you know, right. These people, this God's inspired genius. And you're going, think about the way in which Bach and Beethoven went to the bathroom. Like, you know, it was like, you know,
it's easy to not have a good day. Yeah.
None of us would not tolerate, you know, none of us would tolerate that, you know? So anyway, so yeah. And a lot of these composers actually are some of Stephen and me, my closest friends. We've been through a lot together, and we've made pieces that we care very deeply about together, and we've grown close as a result of it.
Well, that's just fantastic. We'll need to wrap this up relatively soon here, but I do want to leave everybody in this section with a piece of your choir, and this is a composer that you and I have shared working with, Edie Hill from Minneapolis. I commissioned her multiple times when I was doing my work with Cantus, and I know that you've worked with her. Tell me a little bit about just her work and your relationship with her.
So we didn't. You're. What are you going to play?
2084, poem for 2084.
Oh, poem for 2084. So we didn't commission this work. But we have commissioned just this past year this big piece, 35-minute piece
about birds,
about extinct birds, and it's an incredible piece. And so the reason that came about was because our original relationship with her was that Parma Navona Records asked if we record a CD of hers, and I had heard of her, but I didn't really know the music very well, and I looked through it really, very seriously to say, do we want to invest in this? Is this something we have our name on? And I'm like, holy shit, she can write, and like just the whole. And for me, counterpoint is everything, and so the way in which she understands that, and the way in which she navigates choral textures, and just. And
it's very complimentary for the voice, always singable, even when it's hard as heck.
Yeah. So eventually, after we did that CD, and then we performed maybe a couple pieces off of that in public, and then there was another CD that for the same label that we did just 2 pieces of hers on this sort of compilation. And it was in that process that we all went, we need to have our own piece, because we also love her. She's the best. Amazing. When she came for the premiere in December, she couldn't find someone to take care of her the doves that she fosters, and they have to be hand fed. So she brought them with her to Philadelphia. So that just basically tells you Edie Hill. That's it.
Well, it's fantastic. And Donald, I just cannot thank you enough for sharing some of these insights. I think it's the wide-ranging conversation for sure, but I think a lot of the core aspects of what's important to you in your music making really shine through here. So I want to thank you for joining us. Thanks. And I want to play now for you Poem for 2084 by Edie Hill.
from